The docking bay of the hegemony vessel Triumphant Mandate was a massive space filled with ships from 12 different species. Lights of every color blinked and flashed. Machines hummed and clicked. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved about their business, speaking in languages that sounded like music, like grinding rocks, like water flowing over stones. Commander Vaeth Soren stood near the main airlock with his forearms folded across his chest. His gray skin was smooth like a dolphin, and his large black eyes watched the arriving shuttle with growing curiosity. Behind him stood representatives from the most powerful species in the Galactic Council. The Chithari delegate named Scrix looked like a giant praying mantis, all sharp angles and clicking mandibles. The Veluxy ambassador was made entirely of living crystal, shifting colors dancing across its surface like oil on water. And towering above them all was Thrax, the Gorath security chief, a mountain of engineered muscle with 4 eyes and enough weapons built into his body to destroy a small building. They were all waiting for the human security consultant. The shuttle door opened with a soft hiss, and Alara Chun stepped out. She was small. By human standards, she stood at average height, but next to the aliens around her, she looked almost like a child. Her black hair was pulled back tight against her head. Her face showed no expression at all. She wore simple gray clothing that fit close to her body, allowing easy movement. And strapped to her hip was a curved blade in a leather holder. Just a blade. Nothing else. Vaeth felt his mouth parts click together in what his species used for laughter. He fought to control himself, to remain diplomatic. The humans were new to the galactic community. They had only made contact with other species 50 years ago. They were still learning. He had to be patient. Ambassador Chun, he said, using the wrong title on purpose to see how she would react. We were told Earth was sending their finest security specialist for the summit negotiations. The human woman did not correct him. You are looking at her, she said. Her voice was calm and flat. Her eyes moved slowly across the docking bay, looking at everything, missing nothing. Scrix made a sound like dry leaves rubbing together. It was the Chithari way of laughing. Forgive my confusion, the insect creature said. But your weapon, is that ceremonial? Something your people carry for tradition? No, Alara said. But surely you cannot mean to use it for actual security work. The Veluxy ambassador pulsed with bright colors of confusion and amusement. We carry plasma projectors that can burn through ship armor. Directed energy shields that can stop any attack. The Gorath have personal artillery systems built into their very bones. And you bring sharpened metal? I do. The aliens exchanged looks. Some were amused. Some were confused. A few seemed almost offended, as if the human had insulted them by not bringing proper weapons. Vaeth spread his forearms in a gesture of friendly concern. Perhaps, he offered, we could provide you with something more useful? We have many weapons available. I am sure we could find something that would fit your hands. Alara Chun smiled. It was a small smile that did not reach her eyes. I appreciate the offer, Commander. I will manage. She walked past them, following the path toward the crew quarters without waiting for an escort. Somehow, she already knew the way. Behind her, the aliens began to whisper. Is this a joke? Scrix asked quietly. Have the humans sent us a joke? They are a young species, the Veluxy ambassador replied. They do not understand how things work yet. We must be patient and kind. Patient and kind will not stop a syndicate assassination squad, Vaeth muttered. The Vantari Syndicate had made threats against this peace summit. Real threats. Serious threats. And Earth had sent a small woman with a knife. I will speak to their government. Request someone more suitable. As the group began to break apart, Thrax remained still. His 4 eyes stayed fixed on the doorway where the human had disappeared. Something was bothering him. something he could not name or explain. The Gorath were an engineered species. Thousands of years ago, their creators had taken primitive hunter creatures and rebuilt them into perfect soldiers. They had enhanced everything useful and suppressed everything unnecessary. The old instincts, the animal feelings, the primitive fears, all of these had been buried deep under layers of genetic modification, but not completely removed. As Thrax had watched the human enter the docking bay, something deep inside him had stirred. Something old. Something forgotten. The way she moved. The way her eyes had tracked across every person, every shadow, every possible hiding spot. The way her hand had rested on that primitive blade with the easy comfort of long practice. His hunter ancestors, buried deep in his engineered genes, had whispered a warning. Be careful, they said. Be very careful. Thrax shook his massive head. Foolishness. The human was small and weak and carried an ancient weapon that belonged in a museum. There was nothing to fear from her. His instincts were simply confused, reacting to something unfamiliar. He turned and walked away, putting the strange feeling out of his mind. In her assigned quarters, Alara Chun stood alone in the dark. She had not turned on the lights. She did not need them. Her eyes adjusted quickly, and besides, darkness was an old friend. She pulled the curved blade from its holder and held it up. The kukri had been in her family for 6 generations. Its edge was sharp enough to split a hair. Its weight was perfect in her hand, balanced exactly right for cutting and stabbing and throwing. The aliens thought she was a fool. She had seen it in their eyes, heard it in their voices. They thought their plasma weapons and energy shields made them safe. They thought technology had moved beyond the need for such primitive things as blades and instincts and the patient endless hunger of a predator. They were wrong. Alara had studied the Vantari Syndicate for 3 years. She knew how they operated. She knew their methods, their tactics, their favorite ways to kill. And she knew that somewhere on this ship, hidden among the crew or the delegates or the service staff, Syndicate agents were waiting. The other security personnel would watch for obvious threats. They would scan for weapons and bombs and poison. They would trust their technology to keep them safe. Alara would watch for everything else. She slid the kukri back into its holder and began her first patrol of the ship. There was much to learn and little time to learn it. The summit would begin in 2 days. She intended to be ready. 3 days into the Peace Summit, Alara Chun had become famous on the ship. But not in a good way. The delegates gathered each day in the Grand Conference Sphere, a beautiful room that floated at the very center of the triumphant mandate. It was a marvel of alien engineering. The walls were made of energy fields that could show any image or block any weapon. The floor was solid light, strong enough to hold 100 beings, but able to change shape at a thought. The only way to enter was through controlled gravity lifts that scanned every person for weapons, poisons, and bad intentions. 47 armed guards from 6 different species protected the conference sphere. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through metal. They wore armor that could stop almost any attack. Their eyes were enhanced to see in every spectrum of light. And standing by the main entrance, day after day, was one small human with a knife. The jokes had started on the first day. By the 3rd day, they had spread through the entire ship. I heard she sleeps with that blade under her pillow, Scrix whispered to a group of other delegates during a break in negotiations. Like a child with a favorite toy. Their species only discovered space travel 300 years ago, someone replied. We must remember they are still very young. Very primitive. They will learn eventually. If the Syndicate does not kill them first. Laughter rippled through the group. Alara stood at her post and gave no sign that she had heard them. But she had heard everything. She always did. In those 3 days, Alara had learned many things. On the first day, she had mapped every air vent and maintenance tunnel in the ship. She had memorized where they led and how big they were. Some were large enough for a person to crawl through. She made note of those. On the second day, she had watched the guard patrols. She had counted the seconds between each patrol. She had found the gap, the small window of time when one section of corridor was unwatched. It was only 43 seconds. But 43 seconds was enough for many terrible things. On the third day, she had noticed a cleaning drone dot. It was a small machine, about the size of a dog, that moved through the ship picking up dust and waste. Hundreds of such machines worked on the triumphant mandate. No one paid attention to them. They were just part of the background, like the hum of the engines or the flow of recycled air. But Alara paid attention. This particular drone had changed its route. It used to clean the lower corridors near engineering. Now it spent its time near the conference sphere, moving slowly past guard positions, pausing near important doorways. Someone had reprogrammed it. Someone had given it new instructions. Alara found Commander Vaith in his command center, surrounded by glowing displays and busy officers. "Commander," she said, "I need to see the maintenance records for your cleaning drones." Vaith looked at her with obvious confusion. "Cleaning drones? Why would you need those? One of them has changed its patrol pattern. I want to know who changed it and why." The commander made that clicking sound that meant he was amused. "Major Chun, our cleaning drones are controlled by the ship's central computer. They go where they are needed most. If one has changed its pattern, it is because the computer calculated that pattern was more efficient. I would still like to see the records. That information is restricted to ship personnel." Vaith turned back to his displays, clearly dismissing her. "Major, I understand you are trying to do your job, but you must understand that this ship is completely secure. Our sensors can detect a tiny rock floating in space from 300 kilometers away. The Syndicate would need an entire fleet to attack us, and our ships would see them coming long before they arrived. And if the threat is already on board?" The question made Vaith pause. He turned back to face her, and for a moment something dark passed across his face. "Everyone on this ship has been thoroughly scanned. We check their genes, their brain patterns, their thoughts. We use machines that can detect lies and hidden intentions. There are no Syndicate agents here. It would be impossible. Nothing is impossible, Commander." "Major Chun." His voice grew cold. "I have commanded hegemony vessels for 30 cycles. I have fought the Syndicate many times. I have protected diplomats and kings and beings more important than anyone on this ship. Do not tell me my business." Alara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Of course, Commander. My apologies for the disturbance." She left the command center and returned to her post by the conference sphere. But her mind kept working, turning over the puzzle pieces, looking for the pattern she knew was there. That evening, Thrax found himself in the security office, staring at a display screen. He had told himself he was just doing a routine check, just making sure everything was in order. But the truth was different. He was looking at the service records for the cleaning staff. Every name checked out. Every identity was verified. Every background was clean and perfect. There were no problems, no suspicious activities, no anything. Too perfect. Something whispered in the back of his mind. Thrax shook his head angrily. He was being foolish. The human had infected him with her paranoia. There was nothing wrong with the service staff. The records proved it not, but as he shut down the display and left the office, the feeling would not go away. That old buried instinct kept whispering to him, telling him that something was wrong. Something he could not see or name or understand. He passed Alara in the corridor. She was standing perfectly still, watching a cleaning drone as it hummed past. Her hand rested on the handle of her blade. Their eyes met for just a moment. Thrax saw something in those human eyes. Something old. Something patient. Something that had been hunting and surviving and refusing to die since long before his species had been engineered into existence. He looked away and kept walking. That night, he dreamed of ancient forests and creatures that watched from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He dreamed of being hunted by something that never tired, never stopped, never gave up. He woke in darkness, his four hearts beating fast, and did not sleep again until morning. 2 days later, the attack began. The lights died without warning. One moment, the conference sphere was bright and calm, filled with the soft sounds of diplomatic discussion. The next moment, darkness crashed down like a falling wall. The bright white lights switched to deep red emergency lighting that made everything look like it was covered in blood. The delegates screamed. Some of them anyway. The Chithari made high shrieking sounds of panic. The Veluxi ambassador flashed with wild colors of fear and confusion. Even the calm, controlled representatives of the older species showed signs of worry. What is happening? Someone shouted, "Guards!" What is happening? Commander Vaith's voice crackled over the communication system, broken and full of static. "We have lost engine control. Navigation systems are down. Someone has taken over our computers from inside the ship. All security teams report to your stations." This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not the message cut off. Only silence remained. In the blood-red darkness, 47 guards raised their weapons. Their plasma rifles hummed as they powered up. Their armor systems activated, creating glowing shields of protective energy. They formed a circle around the delegates, facing outward, ready for any attack. At her post by the main entrance, Elara Chun drew her kukri. The blade made no sound as it left its holder. No hum of power, no glow of energy. Just old metal, sharp and silent, catching the red light and turning it into something that looked like liquid fire. Across the room, Thrax watched her. He watched the way she held the blade, low and ready. He watched the way her body changed, becoming something different, something more. Her eyes were wide and dark, seeing everything at once. Her breathing had slowed to almost nothing. Every muscle in her body was perfectly still, perfectly ready. The hunter genes buried deep in his engineered body suddenly came alive. Every warning system he possessed started screaming. Every ancient instinct he had been trained to ignore was suddenly shouting at him, telling him that something terrible was about to happen. That death was in this room, and it was not the humans who should be afraid. "Everyone down." He roared the words before he knew he was going to speak. His voice was like thunder in the enclosed space, louder than any alarm, impossible to ignore. The delegates dropped, some from obedience, some from pure animal terror at the sound of a Gorath war cry. The ceiling exploded. 6 figures fell through the gap like spiders dropping on silk threads. They wore suits that bent light around them, making them appear as shifting shadows, impossible to target clearly. Their weapons were plasma blades that glowed white-hot, able to cut through any known armor. Syndicate assassins, the best killers in the galaxy. They hit the ground and immediately began to move, spreading out toward their targets with perfect coordination. They had trained for this mission for months. They knew exactly where each delegate would be standing. They knew exactly how to avoid the guards and their clumsy, predictable weapons. They did not know about Elara Chun. The guards opened fire. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness like small suns, screaming toward the assassins with the power to burn through walls. But the assassins were ready. Their light-bending suits scattered the bolts in 100 directions. Their personal shields absorbed what little got through. One by one, the guards fell as the assassins returned fire with cold precision. 3 guards down. 5, 7. The The Luxy ambassador's shield overloaded and died. Scrix scrambled backward, shrieking in panic. The circle of protection was falling apart, and the assassins had not even slowed down. Then Alara-chan moved. Later, Thrax would try to describe what he saw. He would use words like fast and skilled and deadly, but no words could truly capture it. No words could explain what the human did in those 11 seconds. She did not run. Running was too slow, too clumsy. She flowed. She moved through the chaos like water through rocks, finding paths that should not have existed, appearing where no one expected her to be. The first assassin never saw her coming. He was raising his plasma blade toward the Goroth delegate when suddenly the human was there, inside his reach, too close for his weapons to work. The kukri moved once, fast and clean, and the assassin was falling with a new mouth opened across his throat. Alara was already past him, already moving to the second assassin. Her blade found the gap between his helmet and chest armor, the tiny space where the suit connected, and punched through with perfect accuracy. She knew exactly where to cut, exactly how deep to go. She had studied these suits for years. The third assassin fired his weapon directly at her chest from less than 2 meters away. She was not there, she was behind him, somehow, impossibly. Her blade entered the power unit on his back, killing his shields and his suit and him in one smooth motion. She used his falling body as a platform, launching herself toward the fourth assassin like something out of a nightmare. Thrax found he could not move. His muscles were locked in place. His weapon was still in its holder. He could only watch as the small human with the primitive blade tore through the most dangerous killers in the galaxy, like they were nothing. The fourth assassin managed to turn around, managed to raise his weapon. The kukri took his hand off at the wrist, then reversed in a blur of motion and cut across his faceplate. Sparks flew. Darker things followed. Alara caught the assassin's falling plasma blade out of the air. She threw it without pausing, without even seeming to aim. It buried itself in the chest of the fifth assassin, and she was already running, already closing the distance, already finishing what she had started. The sixth assassin saw what was coming for him. He ran, this trained killer, this elite syndicate operative who had murdered hundreds of beings across dozens of worlds. He saw the human woman coming through the blood-red darkness with that ancient blade in her hand, and he turned and ran as fast as he could. He made it 3 steps. The kukri flew through the air with a soft whisper and buried itself between his shoulder blades. He hit the ground and did not move again. Silence filled the conference sphere. Silence and the smell of blood and burning. 47 guards were scattered across the floor, most of them wounded, many of them dead. 6 assassins lay still, killed by a single blade. Alara-chan walked calmly to the last body and pulled her kukri free. She wiped it clean on the dead man's suit. Commander Veth stared at her with his large black eyes. His mouth parts were trembling. His forehands shook. "Major Chun," he whispered. "What are you?" Alara slid the blade back into its holder. Her breathing was slow and steady. Her hands were perfectly still. She did not look tired or excited or afraid. She looked exactly the same as she had before the attack, calm and patient and watchful. "I am what happens when a species spends 200,000 years as both predator and prey, Commander," she said. "We learned that the best weapons are not always the most advanced. They are the ones that work when everything else fails." She looked around the room at the staring faces, the terrified delegates, the wounded guards. "Now, shall we discuss who let these assassins onto your secure ship?" The ship was still dying around them. Emergency lights flickered in the corridors. Strange sounds came from the walls, the groans and clicks of systems failing one by one. Somewhere in the distance, alarms wailed and then went silent. The triumphant mandate was a wounded beast, And the creature that had wounded it was still hiding somewhere in its body in the conference sphere. Commander Vendeth was arguing with fear in his voice. We must seal the doors and wait for rescue. Protocol demands that we stay together and wait for the fleet to arrive. They will send help. We just need to survive until then. Alara shook her head. Whoever did this is still aboard. They have access to your computers, your systems. How long until they open an airlock and let the vacuum in? How long until they turn off the air recyclers? How long until they find another way to kill everyone on this ship? The commander's gray skin turned pale. He had no answer. I will find them, Alara continued. But I need someone who knows this ship. Someone who can guide me through the places that are not on any map. Every eye in the room turned to Thrax. The Gora security chief stood among the bodies of the fallen assassins, his 4 eyes still fixed on the small human who had killed them. His mind was having trouble understanding what he had seen. His engineer brain wanted to reject it, to call it impossible, to find some rational explanation. But his hunter genes knew the truth. They had always known. I will go with her, Thrax said. His voice was rough and uncertain. For the first time in his long career, he felt like a young creature following a greater predator into the darkness. They left the conference sphere and entered the wounded corridors of the ship. The red emergency lights cast long shadows that jumped and shifted with every flicker. The air tasted wrong, full of smoke and the sharp smell of burned electronics. Alara moved with quiet purpose, her kukri in her hand. She stopped at every intersection, every doorway, every shadow. She looked at things Thrax could not see. She listened to sounds Thrax could not hear. How did you know? He finally asked, keeping his voice low. The attack. You knew it was coming before it happened. The cleaning drone, Alara replied without breaking stride. On the 3rd day, its movement pattern changed. Someone had reprogrammed it to map our guard positions. To find our weaknesses, you noticed a cleaning drone? I noticed everything. She stopped at a junction where 4 corridors met. Her head tilted to one side, like an animal catching a scent. Your people were hunters once, were they not? Before the engineers changed you. Thrax felt his muscles tighten. We do not speak of the old ways. The Gorath were lifted up from primitive creatures. We were given intelligence, strength, purpose. The animal instincts were removed, were they? All of them? Her dark eyes met his. What did those instincts tell you about me, the moment I came onto this ship? The question cut deep. Thrax wanted to lie, to give some diplomatic answer. But the human's gaze would not let him hide. They told me to be afraid, he admitted. I did not understand why. You were small and weak and carried a primitive weapon. There was nothing to fear, but you feared anyway. Yes. Alara almost smiled. It was a strange expression. Not quite happy, not quite sad. Your instincts were trying to tell you something. Something my species learned a long time ago. Back when we were still living in caves and hunting with rocks and sticks. She began walking again, and Thrax followed. The most dangerous predator, she continued, is not the one with the biggest claws, not the one with the strongest armor, not the one with the deadliest venom. The most dangerous predator is the one that never stops adapting, never stops learning, never stops thinking. The one that looks at something bigger and stronger and faster than itself and says, I will find a way to kill you anyway. They turned down a narrow maintenance corridor. The lights here were completely dead, and Thrax had to switch to his heat vision to see. Alara kept moving without slowing down, as if darkness was her natural home. The galaxy looks at humans and sees a young species with primitive technology, she said. They see our short lives and our weak bodies and our simple weapons, and they think we are no threat. They are wrong. We are not strong despite our weakness. We are strong because of it. Because we have always had to be smarter, more patient, more determined than everything that wanted to eat us. She held up her hand suddenly. Stop. Thrax froze. They are close, Alara whispered. How do you know? I cannot see anything. Cannot hear anything. Heartbeat. 20 meters ahead. Behind the maintenance panel on the left wall. They are waiting for us to pass. Thrax strained every enhanced sense he possessed. Sight, sound, heat, motion, nothing. Corridor ahead was completely empty according to his instruments. I detect nothing, he said. Stop. Using your machines. They have fooled your machines. Use your instincts. The old ones. The ones your engineers tried to bury. Thrax wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he was Gorath, that he had moved beyond such primitive tools. But the human's words echoed in his mind, and he found himself closing his 4 eyes. He reached down into himself, past the layers of engineering, past the training and the discipline and the rational mind, down into the deep dark place where his ancestors lived, the hunters who had stalked through alien jungles millions of years ago. Before his species had even developed language, he felt them wake up. He felt their ancient hunger and their endless patience and their terrible, perfect awareness thought, and there, faint as a whisper, he felt it. A rhythm, a pulse, something alive and waiting in the darkness ahead. I have them, he breathed. His eyes were still closed, but he did not need them anymore. His hunter's soul had found the prey. Good. Alara's voice was soft and satisfied. Now you understand. Now you remember what you truly are. Thrax opened his eyes. The world looked different now, sharper, clearer, more real than it had been in years. He could feel the old instincts rising up inside him, mixing with his engineered abilities, making him something new, something more. What is the plan? He asked. Elara raised her kukri. The blade caught the faint glow of distant emergency lights and turned it into a thin line of red fire. We going fast. We going quiet. We do not stop until the prey is dead. She looked at him with those dark, ancient eyes. Can you do that? Can you hunt like your ancestors did, before the engineers took the wild out of you? Thrax felt a growl building in his chest, a sound he had never made before, a sound from the old ways, from the time of blood and hunger and the joy of the chase. Yes, he said. I can hunt. Then follow me. They moved forward into the darkness together. 2 predators from different worlds, different times, different paths of evolution. But in that moment, they were the same. They were hunters, and their prey was waiting. The infiltrator was a hegemony officer named Pyrrhix. He had served on the triumphant mandate for 3 years. His records were perfect. His service was excellent. His loyalty scores were among the highest in the fleet. Every scan, every test, every verification system said he was exactly what he appeared to be, a trusted sub-commander with a spotless reputation. The Syndicate had spent 4 years building that identity. 4 years of careful work, turning a promising young officer into their perfect weapon. Pyrrhix had passed every security check because he was not pretending to be someone else. He was Pyrrhix. The Syndicate had simply changed who Pyrrhix was, slowly and patiently, until only a shell remained with their agent hidden inside. No computer could detect that kind of infiltration. No scan could find it. No technology in the galaxy could see the truth. But Alara Chan had noticed a clean drone. When they found him in the maintenance corridor, Pyrrhix was still trying to finish his mission. He had a small device in his hands, something that would have opened every airlock on the ship at once. He was entering the final commands when the hunters came out of the darkness. He fought, of course. He was well-trained and armed with weapons far more advanced than a simple blade. But he was alone, and he was afraid. And he had made the mistake of thinking that technology was the only thing that mattered. He died surprised. They always did, Alara thought. When they finally understood what humans truly were, the ship's systems came back online an hour later. The crew managed to restore navigation and propulsion. The fleet was contacted, and rescue vessels were sent. The summit would continue, had to continue, because too much depended on its success. But something had changed. The delegates gathered, once more in the conference sphere. The bodies had been removed. The damage had been repaired. New guards stood at their posts, their weapons ready. Everything looked the same as before, but the way they looked at Alara, Chen was completely different. The Veluxi ambassador approached her first. The crystalline being's colors were slow and careful, showing deep respect and something that might have been fear. "Major Chen," the ambassador said, "I owe you my existence. We all do. I must apologize for my earlier words. I dismissed your capabilities. I mocked your weapons. I was a fool." Alara shook her head slightly. "No apology is necessary, Ambassador. You believed what your experience had taught you. You were simply missing information, but I must understand." The Chithari delegate crept closer, his sharp limbs clicking nervously against the floor. "Your species is young. Your technology is inferior to ours by any measure. Your weapons, your ships, your everything. And yet you defeated 6 elite assassins with a blade. How is this possible?" Alara considered the question for a long moment. Around her, the delegates waited in silence. Even the guards were listening. 300,000 years ago, she said slowly, my ancestors lived on a world that was trying very hard to kill them. Everything was bigger than they were, faster, stronger. They had no claws to fight with, no armor to protect themselves, no venom to make their enemies fear them. By every measure, they should have died. She touched the handle of her kukri, the blade that had been passed down through her family for generations. But they did not die. They became something else instead. They became patient. They became clever. They became creatures that could look at an animal 10 times their size and think, if I follow that creature for 3 days without rest, it will eventually fall down. And I will eat. They became the only species on their world that hunted by refusing to give up. The delegates exchanged glances. Some of them understood. Others were still confused. Your species developed past such primitive needs, Alara continued. You built machines to do your hunting. You engineered yourselves beyond simple instinct. You created weapons that could destroy stars. And you were right to do so. Those were good choices. But in leaving behind the old ways, you forgot something important. She looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes in turn. You forgot that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not the biggest weapon. It is a creature that looks at impossible odds and refuses to die. A creature that will chase its prey across continents if it has to. A creature that has spent hundreds of thousands of years learning to be afraid of the dark, and then learning to be the thing that the dark is afraid of. Her hand rested on her blade. That is what humans are. That is what we have always been. You cannot scan for it. You cannot defend against it. Because it is not technology. She paused. It is us. Silence filled the conference sphere. The delegates did not move, did not speak. They simply watched the small human with her ancient blade and tried to understand what they were truly seeing. Then Thrax stepped forward. The Gorath security chief was massive. He stood 2 meters tall and weighed more than 4 adult humans combined. He had weapons built into his body that could level buildings. He was engineered for war, created to be the ultimate soldier. He stopped in front of Alara Chun and slowly, deliberately, bowed his head. I understand now, he said. Why my ancestors feared yours in the dreaming memories. Why the old instincts screamed warnings when you came aboard. Not because you were strong in the way we measure strength, but because you never, ever stopped being hungry. Never stopped being dangerous. Never stopped being what the universe needs to fear. Alara inclined her head in return, accepting the words with quiet dignity. The summit continued. The treaties were signed. Peace was established between species that had been enemies for thousands of years. It was exactly the outcome that everyone had hoped for, but something else changed that day. Something smaller, but perhaps more important, the word spread through the galactic community. At first, it was just a story, a tale of one human woman who had killed 6 assassins with a knife. But as the story grew, as more details emerged, as beings began to truly understand what had happened on the triumphant mandate, the story became something more. It became a warning. Humans were no longer seen as young and primitive and harmless. They were seen as survivors, adapters, predators who had clawed their way up from nothing and refused to stop climbing. In the years that followed, whenever galactic powers needed security for important events, they no longer laughed at human consultants. They requested them specifically. They understood that the being with the most advanced weapon was not always the most dangerous one in the room. And sometimes, late at night on space stations and starships across the galaxy, older species would tell their young ones stories. Stories about creatures from a little blue world who had spent thousands of years learning to hunt and survive and overcome impossible odds. Never underestimate them, the elders would say. Never assume they are weak because they are small. Never think you are safe because you are strong. Because somewhere in every human, buried deep but never gone, is the thing that chased mammoths across frozen plains and faced saber-toothed cats with nothing but pointed sticks. They carry it with them wherever they go. And when the time comes, when everything else fails, they will show you exactly what that means. On Earth, Alara-chan returned to her normal life. She trained new security specialists. She taught them how to watch and wait and see what others missed. And on quiet evenings, she would sit alone and sharpen her kukri, the blade that had saved more lives than any plasma weapon ever built. She never forgot what she was. None of them did. They were human. They were hungry. And the galaxy was learning to be afraid.